When most people hear about paranormal experiences, they usually think of ghostly shapes caught out of the corner of the eye, or shadows that move where no light should fall. Skeptics often wave it off, saying our eyes play tricks on us. But what if it isn't our eyes? What if it's our ears? Many veterans know what it's like to carry ringing in their heads after years of exposure to gunfire, artillery, and explosions. But some people report something stranger, hearing entire battles, volleys of musket fire, the roar of cannons, men screaming and charging, in places where no battle is happening at all. These aren't random spots. They're almost always old battlefields, landscapes where unimaginable blood was spilled. The idea is unsettling, that moments of extreme violence may somehow leave a permanent scar on the land itself, replaying endlessly like an echo of death. How would you react if you suddenly heard the chaos of war erupting around you in a place of total silence? Tonight we'll explore stories of just that, voices of the past that refuse to be silenced. These are the tales of soldiers who fought long ago, and of the people who claim to have heard them still fighting today, in a fog we might call the echo of war. Our first story begins in the 17th century, during one of England's darkest chapters. When King Charles III took the throne in 1625, he ruled with the belief that his power came directly from God, the divine right of kings. Parliament was meant to balance that power, to ensure the crown couldn't act unchecked. But Charles saw Parliament as a nuisance. He dismissed them, bypassed them, and attempted to rule England by his will alone. The tension boiled until 1642, when conflict exploded into civil war. Royalists loyal to Charles clashed with parliamentarians, both sides raising armies from across the country. For months their troops wandered the countryside, skirmishing in small clashes but avoiding a decisive confrontation. That changed on October 23, 1642. By chance, both armies converged on a stretch of rolling fields near the Warwickshire village of Edge Hill. Neither side had intended to fight there, but fate had chosen the ground. At dawn, drums pounded and muskets were loaded. Thousands of men faced one another, many of them barely trained farmhands holding weapons heavier than they'd ever carried before. Though firearms were common, much of the fighting still looked medieval. Cavalry charges, sword duels, and brutal hand-to-hand combat when powder ran out. From morning to dusk, the battlefield was a slaughterhouse. Muskets thundered at point-blank range. Cavalry clashed in the fields, swords sparking against steel. When blades shattered, soldiers reached for daggers, pikes, even stones from the ground. By nightfall, more than 4,000 men were dead or wounded. Neither side claimed victory. The survivors stumbled through a haze of smoke, the cries of the dying echoing across the hills. The next day, both armies prepared to fight again, but exhaustion and horror won out. Instead, they gathered weapons, tended to the wounded, and withdrew. The war would rage on elsewhere, but Edge Hill would never be forgotten. For a time, the land returned to peace. Shepherds once again grazed their flocks on the green slopes. Travelers passed by unaware that the soil beneath their feet drank the blood of thousands. But soon unsettling rumors spread. The battle was not over. Only months after the carnage, locals claimed the fighting had returned, not in flesh, but in ghostly form. One crisp evening, a group of shepherds tended their flocks near the battlefield. As the stars glittered above, the night should have been still. Instead, the silence broke with the distant thud of drums and the shrill call of horns. The men froze. The sounds grew louder. Musket fire cracking, cannons booming, horses screaming. In terror, it was as if the war had returned. "George, dost thou hear it?" One shepherd whispered, staring wide-eyed into the night. His companion nodded slowly. By God, the air itself is filled with their cries. Then they saw it. Above the fields, in the very sky itself, ghostly armies appeared. Soldiers in the colors of King Charles clashed against those of Parliament, their spectral blades flashing in the moonlight. Phantom muskets fired into the night, leaving no smoke yet echoing like thunder. The battle raged for hours until finally it faded with the coming dawn. Terrified, the shepherds hurried into town and told the officials what they had witnessed. At first they were laughed at, dismissed as drunkards or fools. But when the same officials and clergymen came to investigate the following night, they too heard the horns and drums, saw the soldiers in the sky, and felt the earth tremble beneath phantom cannon fire. The story spread across England, eventually reaching King Charles himself. Having stood on that battlefield months earlier, the king was deeply shaken. He sent trusted officers, men who had survived Edge Hill, to investigate. When they returned, their report chilled him to the core. The stories were true. Not only had they heard the battle, but some swore they recognized the faces of fallen comrades among the ghostly ranks. Friends who had died at Edge Hill were fighting again in the heavens above. For centuries, tales persisted that on the anniversary of the battle, the sounds of war could still be heard. The soldiers of Edge Hill, it seemed, refused to rest. If England has Edge Hill, then America has Gettysburg. The town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, was little more than a quiet crossroads in 1863. But in July of that year, it became the stage for the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. Confederate General Robert E. Lee marched his army north, hoping to strike into Union territory and pressure Washington, D.C. Into Pennsylvania came over 70,000 Confederate soldiers. Standing against them were nearly 100,000 Union troops under General George Meade. On July 1st, by sheer chance, the two armies collided near Gettysburg. What began as a skirmish quickly spiraled into 3 days of carnage. Streets ran red, hillsides became graveyards, and by the end, more than 50,000 men were dead, wounded, or missing. The Union stood victorious, but at a staggering cost. The townsfolk faced the grim duty of burying thousands, often in shallow graves. Rainstorms later unearthed the bodies, leaving rotting corpses scattered across the fields. The land was permanently scarred, and soon, the stories began. For over a century, visitors have reported ghostly encounters on the battlefield, disembodied voices, phantom gunfire, spectral soldiers wandering through the trees. Even today, Gettysburg is considered one of the most haunted places in America. In 2015, a woman, we'll call her Kate, visited Gettysburg with her family. A lover of history, she was eager to walk the battlefield and imagine the events of those 3 terrible days. The first night, as the family settled into their hotel room, something strange happened. Kate's brother suddenly bolted upright, rushed to the door, and stepped into the hall. Confused, the others asked what was wrong. "You didn't hear it," he said. "Cannons, men shouting orders, gunfire, it was right outside." But none of them had heard a thing. Over the next few days, Kate's family explored various landmarks. At a hill called Little Round Top, where Union soldiers had once held their ground against repeated Confederate assaults, Kate lay down between 2 rocks, pretending she was a soldier sighting down her rifle. Suddenly, she felt a hand pressed gently on her shoulder, and a whisper breathed into her ear. "I see him." Startled, she spun around, but her brother was standing far away by a monument nowhere near her. Later, while speaking with another family by the roadside, Kate and her mother heard fife and drum music drifting over the fields. The cheerful, marching tune grew louder, but there were no reenactors, no musicians, and no visible source. The other family excused themselves quickly, clearly disturbed. On their final day, Kate and her mother climbed Big Round Top, a wooded hill near the battlefield. Sitting on a boulder to rest, the forest suddenly went silent. No birds, no crickets. Then came the sounds of chaos. Hooves pounding, bugles blaring, muskets firing, men screaming in agony. The women froze. The battle raged around them, unseen, but unmistakable. Then, over the noise, came desperate cries. "Help me! Please don't let me die!" Terrified, Kate and her mother ran back to the parking lot, where they encountered a park ranger. Seeing their pale faces, he simply nodded, as though he'd seen it all before. The echoes of war are not confined to centuries past. Even the scars of the Second World War seem to linger. On August 19, 1942, the Canadian Army launched its first major action of the war, a daring raid on the French port of Dieppe. The plan was to test German defenses, seize intelligence, and prove the Allies could strike the continent, but things went wrong from the start. German patrols spotted the fleet, and by dawn the defenders were ready. When the Canadians stormed the beach, they walked into a massacre. Machine gun nests tore them apart, artillery rained down from the cliffs, and tanks bogged down in the loose stones of the shore. Of the 5,000 Canadians who landed, nearly 3,400 were killed, wounded, or captured. The raid was a disaster. 9 years later, in 1951, two British women, Dorothy and her sister-in-law Agnes, stayed at a seaside hotel near Dieppe. In the early morning hours, Dorothy awoke to the sounds of gunfire. Stepping onto the balcony, she called Agnes. "Dre." Two women stood in shock as the night filled with the sounds of battle, rifles cracking, bombs exploding, airplanes roaring overhead, men shouting in panic. For 3 hours they listened as the chaos raged on the beach below. Yet when the sun rose, the beach was empty, only the waves lapping at the shore. Later, researchers noted that the women had been staying near the very section of beach where Canadian soldiers had landed in 1942, many of them cut down within minutes. Their descriptions matched the sequence of events during the actual raid. It was as if the tragedy had replayed itself in sound alone. What causes these strange phenomena? Are they simply tricks of the mind, or something else? One scientific idea is the concept of acoustic shadows. Terrain, weather, and wind can distort sound, carrying noises for miles in some directions while silencing them in others. During the real Battle of Gettysburg, residents over 100 miles away reported hearing the cannons, while others just a few miles off heard nothing at all. But acoustic shadows can't explain phantom voices, whispers, or the sight of ghostly armies in the sky. That's where paranormal theories step in. The stone tape theory suggests that moments of extreme trauma, like war, can imprint themselves into the environment, especially stone. Just as a tape recorder captures sound, the land itself may replay the memories of those who suffered. There, skeptics dismiss it as imagination. Believers argue it explains why so many battlefields around the world, from Edge Hill to Gettysburg to Dieppe, remain haunted by the past. Another idea is that time itself can fold, allowing us brief glimpses into moments long gone. Perhaps what people hear is not a replay, but the real battle, bleeding through across centuries. Whatever the explanation, the fact remains. Countless witnesses across history have reported the same thing. The sounds of war in places where silence should reign. Across England, America, France, and beyond, old battlefields remain restless. Soldiers long dead still seem to march, shout, and fight, their final moments echoing endlessly across time. Perhaps it is memory trapped in stone. Perhaps it is time itself unraveling. Or perhaps the dead refuse to be forgotten. One thing is certain. The next time you stand on a quiet field where men once clashed in brutal combat, listen closely. The wind may carry more than just the rustle of grass. In the stillness, you may hear drums, gunfire, and voices crying out from centuries past. Because, on old battlefields, strange things still happen.